Hello whiskey friends, welcome to Whiskey Whistle. I'm your host Mark and this is Whiskey Review number 91. Today we're going to be looking at a very special Canadian whiskey, in fact, and it goes by the name Stalk and Barrel. Stalk and Barrel single malt whiskey, in fact. This is from the Still Waters Distillery in Toronto, the northern part of Toronto, I believe in a district called Concord perhaps. And well, it's a very, very new distillery. It opened in 2009, so they've been in operation for now about 7 years. And they have a single malt, they have a rye whiskey, they have something called a Canadian whiskey, which would be a blended whiskey, I would believe, and then another one called 11+1, which is a very interesting name for a whiskey. I think there's a reason for that. Anyway, so here it is. This is the single malt from Stalk and Barrel. Very light in color, probably fairly young. Obviously this would be much less than 7 years old, probably on the order of between 3 and perhaps 5 years. This comes from cask number 66, so I don't know how many casks they're putting out per week or per month, but that could give you an indication of the number of years it's been sitting in the wings for the company anyway. So let's get that poured, shall we? Quite a tight cork, by the way. It's a composite cork. Composite, well, it's a plastic or rubber cork. Fits in very, very tightly. So give that a good tug when you're trying to get it out. And don't worry about messing up the little label there, because it's going to happen, but you can stick it back on as I have. Okay, so we'll get that poured in my Copita glass. Thanks, Mom and Dad. There we go. That's probably enough. Maybe I need a little dash more, I would say. There we are. Beautiful bit of sunshine here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm stealing again a little bit of time from my family to get this done for you and for me. I do enjoy doing these whiskey reviews. We'll set that there. Look at the light coming through there now. And if you're wondering why you see two of them, you're not seeing double. What you're seeing is the Stalk and Barrel handmade rye whiskey as well, which will be featured in the next review. So we'll set that there. Now, well, let's talk very briefly about the distillery while we let that air and get some breathing in. Okay, and we'll talk just a little bit about the distillery. And I'm sorry if I'm mumbling over some of my words. I had one glass earlier just to the rye to give that a taste. Anyway, let's see here. So first of all, I mentioned that already. 2009. This is Ontario's first micro distillery, and owned by two gentlemen, both named Barry Steen or Stein, and also Barry Bernstein or Bernstein, depending on the pronunciation they prefer. So they started it in 2009. These are two former businessmen who decided to do something that they really wanted to do. Sounds good to me. And they have 3 stills. They've got a pot still. They have a very short column still with, I think, 5 plates. And then they have a very tall column still with, I believe, 12 plates. And they use these in succession in a very interesting way to make their whiskey. One thing I read from the CanadianWhiskey.org site, that's from Davin de Kergamo, is that they put the unfiltered wort, the unfiltered beer, let's call it, directly into the pot still as opposed to filtering it first. So that's interesting. Yeah. So that's pretty cool, I would say. And they use the short column still, maybe somewhat analogous to the line arm, just to give it some copper interaction. And again, this is coming from Davin de Kergamo. Thank you very much for all of your fantastic entries in your website, Mr. Kergamo. Thank you. Anyway, anything else? Well, right. So anything else? I think that's pretty much it. Other than they've won a whole lot of awards, which is great. I think 2013 Canadian Distillery of the Year and lots of other accolades for the actual whiskey too. So let's get into the nosing, shall we? And we'll have a short advertisement right there. Welcome back. Onto the nose. This is Stalk and Barrel Single Malt. Oh, color-wise, well, very pale lemon yellow color. When you think of whiskey as being a brown spirit, this certainly is not brown, but the great thing is it's natural in color. It's also non-chill filtered, and it's 46% ABV, everything that we want. Onto the nose. When I smell this, I get a lot of marzipan, apricot kernels from the inside of the pit. There's some wood smoke there, and juicy fruit, the gum. There's not a whole lot going on there, but it's very, very, very nice. Very nice to smell. And well, maybe a touch of vanilla peeking its way in there as well. Okay, on to the taste. Cheers to Barry and Barry, the owners of Stalk and Barrel Still Waters Distillery. It's sweet, fruity, and nutty. Perhaps slightly anemic in terms of the flavors, but what I'm getting are some ripe plums and of course almonds, both raw and also some toasted ones. Let's go back in there. It's quite light in body, and most people, if they tried this, they would say that it was smooth. So it doesn't have a lot of bite, doesn't have a lot of bitterness, doesn't have a lot of sourness that to me would give complexity, but to others makes something taste slightly on the harsh side. So it's very light. One more time. And some apricot pits in there as well. So a little bit dry, a little bit fruity. The finish is basically vanilla with almond. And I wrote here vanilla almond baked pastry. And perhaps some custard cream flavors left over. Now, one thing to say, it is completely pleasant, which is nice. It's quite young, but very pleasant. Now let's add some water. And I've learned through measuring that this spoon here at my parents' place, that's half a teaspoon. Okay, so let's put in some nice birds in the backyard here. Let's put in a nice half teaspoonful. And we will let that mix up, stroll around the glass. No shaky shakies. Can't believe I said that again. Thank you, Ralphie. Now, there's actually a picture here of Ralphie Mitchell from Ralphie Stuff on YouTube. This is from his visit to the distillery. I wish I could do that. Maybe someday I will. And sorry about the noise, there's some children playing next door. Hopefully that adds to the excitement. Anyway, so he went and interviewed Barry and Barry, Mr. Stein and Mr. Mr. Stein and Mr. Where is it? Mr. Bernstein and Steen and Bernstein. Barry and Barry. We'll leave it with Barry and Barry, I think. They're much older than me, though, I would say. Much, let's say 10 to 15 years older than me. Anyway, so Ralphie went there and learned about their operations, and I've got a photo of him here that's from him, so I'd better give credit to the photo. The photo is from right from Ralphie's YouTube site. You can just type in Ralphie, and I believe that was review number 362. Okay, all right, so that's all mixed in. Let's get onto the nose with water. We'll have one more short advertisement right here. Welcome back. Let's get on to the nose with water. This is Stillwater Distillery's Stock and Barrel Single Malt Canadian Whiskey. Now, the nose sweetens up a little bit, and this is the second time that this has sort of hit my mind. I find the spirit here, the distillery house style, to be very similar to that of Glenlivet. So there's something very Glenlivet-y here in the glass that I'm smelling. And I don't just smell that in this one, I also smell that a little bit in the 100% rye. So isn't that interesting? So it has something to do with the, terroir, I guess, somewhat. The still shape, perhaps somewhat. The way that they are cutting the whiskey, choosing the when to start the heart, choosing how much feints and how much the foreshots to put in. Anyway, so some wood smoke, there's some sweet grasses, it's a little bit floral, the marzipan dissipates but it does return, and I've written here marzipan stuffed baked apples. So much more complex with water. And again, there's that vanilla note creeping in there. Okay, let's get on to the taste. Cheers again, everyone. A little bit sweeter, touch of vanilla, some spicy and dry notes develop a little bit more with water. And another interesting note here I wrote, which is a Canadian tasting note, baked Saskatoon pie. And the finish with water, well, there's a bit of peach, a little bit of apricot, and the pit as well as the flesh as well as the skin. So sweetness and dryness and bitterness all rolled into one. Yes, I think this may eventually end up being known as the Canadian Glenlivet. Of course, a much craftier version of. One thing that Stillwater's distillery prides himself on is being a grain to glass operation. The grain they try to source locally, and they both distill the whiskey as well as bottling it themselves. So that's a pretty unique operation here in Canada, at least in the same building. So interesting. And you can see the interesting photos of this, the stills that they've got there. The still they had made, I believe it is German made. Anyway, beautiful still that they've got there. Lots of copper, which is great. Copper, if you're not sure, is considered to be the fourth ingredient in whiskey. The first three being barley, yeast, and water. So the copper contact apparently lends itself to a lot of the flavor that we love in our whiskey. So interesting. Okay, let's get on to the scoring for Stillwater's Distillery's Stock and Barrel Single Malt Canadian Whiskey. I don't think it says Canadian Whiskey. It should say But anyway, it's a product of Canada. Now, you know, so Canadian whiskey has its own style. This is not the style of Canadian whiskey, but you know, it is a Canadian whiskey in as much as single grain is to Scotland. You know, if it happens to be made there. So anyway, okay. So what score does this get? This is going to get 81 out of 100. That is the WhiskyWhistle the WhiskyWhistle. I think I've had too much. The WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for Stock and Barrel single malt whiskey. And I've written here, it's a great spirit, but it needs more cask time. Has a very interesting house style. Again, very much akin to Glenlivet. It's got a nice bit of nuttiness to it as well. Marzipan, which I love. Now, what am I going to call this one? This one I'm going to be calling the Prodigal Son. Not so much that it has gone away or come back, but that there is a lot of potential here. There's potential for greatness, and I think there's going to be some very, very interesting things coming out of this distillery in the very near future. Okay, so 81 out of 100, that is the WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for Stock and Barrel single malt whiskey from Canada. And this is Mark. I'm your host here at WhiskyWhistle, signing out from Winnipeg in Canada. That's where I was born and raised. Thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for the next one, which will be Still Waters Stock and Barrel handmade rye whiskey, 100% rye. Cheers everyone, goodbye.